Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Kestony. Welcome to my video. In this video I will teach you how to play Queen's Gambit accepted variations, and hopefully in less than 10 minutes I will cover all the basic lines. Now when you switch from e2 to e4 to d2 to d4 Queen's Gambit, the problem with many amateur players is that they are afraid of playing gambits. Now this video is for those who are, let's say, 1800 and lower, and you really don't sacrifice a pawn in Queen's Gambit accepted. There are many ways to regain pawn and get at least a minimal advantage everywhere, and it really doesn't take much of memorization. So let's go from the very beginning, d2 to d4, d5, c4. Black captures the pawn. There are many ways to play here. For example, knight f3 is the main line among the grandmasters. Also, e2 to e4 is very popular. We're not only attacking the c4 pawn, but we are taking the center with those two powerful pawns. But it can get very sharp very quickly. There are also moves like queen e4, giving a check and regaining the pawn, knight c3. And the move that I recommend to my students is e2 to e3. This little small tiny move is very decent even among the top elite grandmasters. So we are attacking the c4 pawn right away. So let's look at the black options here. Now, firstly, let's look at how black can defend the pawn. So the obvious move is b7 to b5. And there are quite a few traps here that white can set up. Firstly, we have to play a2 to a4. Now, this b5 guy is defending the c4 pawn, and so we are attacking that b5 guy. Now, if black decides to capture it, then look how ugly black pawn structure is. He has weak pawns on a4 and c4, and white has a very decent advantage here because those pawns will fall pretty soon here. White has many ways of attacking them. So after playing a2 to a4, black has to defend the b5. But both moves, a7 to a6 for example, is a bad one because white can simply capture and black cannot recapture because his rook is hanging. So let's say black plays c6 here. Well, there is another trap here. We take on b5, c takes b5, and you can pause the video if you want to find the best move for white here. Okay, so the move is queen f3. It doesn't look very natural move, putting the queen on f3, but in this case, well, we're attacking the rook, and black is kind of forced to play something like b7 and give up the piece, so white is winning to protect the rook. Okay, so as you can see, after e3, b5 is not working. What other option he has? Well, he can play queen d5. Well, the most natural move here is knight c3. We're attacking the queen right away and asking where she wants to go. She has few options. Let's say she plays queen e6. Now, after this move, we can simply play knight f3, and we're threatening to go to e5. Let's say black responds with knight f6. We simply go knight e5, and here we go. We are recapturing the pawn. And white has a decent advantage here because black's queen is in a strange square where she can lose many tempos, and white leads in development. Well, if queen decides to go to c6, then we can simply play something like knight f3. Of course, bishop g4 follows almost immediately, but then we can get the tempo by playing d5. So the queen wants to protect the pawn here, and then we play b3. Of course, black cannot take because he's losing the queen to the bishop. And so if he insists to play something like b5, then we can simply take here and play queen d4 again, attacking the pawn on c4. And even if we get double pawns here on the f line, white has never dreamed of getting such a good position out of the opening. I imagine it's near winning, and it should be winning here, okay? Let's look at another line. So after e3, let's say black decides to play bishop to e6. Now, I remember I had to play a very famous grandmaster, Kuprejcik. He's actually beaten 4 world champions. I think Petrosian, Tal, Smyslov, and he drew against Kasparov and Karpov. So I remember the day before I thought, wow, I'm playing such a legend tomorrow, what should I play? And I looked at a few lines, and one of the lines I saw that he plays this one. And so I was preparing for with white, and I actually got a very decent advantage in move I think 10 or 15. Engine even gave me +1. So I actually played knight f3. I think he played knight f6, but let's look at c6, and I play queen c2 here. And the idea is that I'm attacking the c4 pawn now with 2 pieces, so he has to protect. And then there is this easy way of regaining the pawn here, knight g5. We're attacking the h7 pawn and the bishop on e6. And black cannot really allow of capturing, so he has to play something like bishop d7, and then we simply regain the pawn. Now, black can also be, white can also be a little bit more ambitious, and he can play e3. So after black captures on b3, 8 takes b3, white has a decent long-term compensation. It's hard to describe this compensation, it's positional advantage, but if you're more ambitious or you are stockfish, then you should play v3. But with knight g5, we simply regain the pawn very fast. Okay, let's look at other options. e3, and 2 similar moves there are e5 and c5. There is another beautiful trap here. So firstly, we recapture the pawn on c4, then c takes d4, and we play knight f3 here. Now, there is a trap if black decides to play the pawn takes e3. You can pause the video and find the winning move here for white. Okay, so the winning move here is bishop f7 takes check. And black is forced to take, and then he loses his queen. Nice, right? There is a simple idea if white plays not c5 but e5 here. Then again, we take here. Takes here, knight f3, and if black plays something like this, then it's okay. We can castle and regain the pawn and enjoy the advantage. But if he decides to take, then again we have this beautiful move. Here, of course, black has moved king e7, but after queen b3, engine says +5, totally winning, resign for black. Okay, let's jump to c5 quickly again. So let's say that he doesn't play d takes e3 here, he plays something like knight f6, then we simply take on d4, and we're ready to castle, play the knight to c3, put the bishop out, and when the time is ready, we want to push our pawn from d4 to d5, and white has a classical advantage in standard isolated pawn position. So these variations are if black decides to keep the pawn and defend the c4 pawn, or play c5, e5. Let's look at one main line if black decides to play classically, knight f6. Then we simply capture the pawn, black plays e6, knight f3, c5, we simply castle. Now very standard move, and this c5 pawn, c7 to c5 pawn break is very popular in these kind of positions, but with white, as soon as we castle, you can see that our rook and queen are connected, and we're ready to take on c5. For example, we don't want to take right here because our king is kind of in the center, but I'm sorry. But once we castle, we're ready to take. So the main line here is a6. Now we can take on c5. We exchange the queens, bishop takes c5, and simply b3. White has a comfortable position with no risks. It's clear where his pieces are gonna go, and as I mentioned, decent plus, not something very huge, but a very calm play and no risks. Please, if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to my channel for more,